Hello, and welcome to a new season of the Best Fleets to Drive For podcast. I'm Mark Morrell, co-creator of the Best Fleets to Drive For program. And starting out this season, as we do every year, we've got our Interviewers Roundtable. And I am joined today by four of the, I don't even know how many people were involved in interviewing and scoring this year, but I've got four of them. Two first-timers and two returning interviewers. So I'm joined by Rick and Trish, who were involved this year for the second time, and Deanna and Lindsay, who were joining us for the first time. And I think we set them up for failure by telling them it was going to be a lovely, easy experience, and they would have fun doing it. And yeah, they're the only two that now return my calls when I ask if people want to be on a podcast. So maybe we need to change how we communicate about this process, but no, I'm kidding. We tell everybody that it is a difficult process and it is going to be complicated, but worth it. And some people believe us and some people think it will be fine and then learn the hard way. So today we are going to talk about everybody's experiences. We're going to talk about what you learned, what you were expecting, all of that kind of stuff through the interview process, and also through the scoring and all the way up to the big announcement, which happened at the end of January. So to begin with, I am going to put one of the first timers on the spot, and I'm going to go to Lindsay and say, what were you expecting? So what expectations did we establish coming into this for you?
Yeah, just basically that it was going to be busy. It was going
Mm-hmm.
to be a lot. There was a lot of prep that went into it, both just from Trish and I one-on-one, and then also group prep. So that was really helpful. It did at times feel like I think it was Rick that used the analogy drinking from a fire hose
Mm-hmm.
at first. Like before you
Yeah.
actually get into it, you're given all this information and it's coming at you. And but you still can't fully comprehend what you're about to get hit with until you're actually in the midst of it. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it was you guys prepped us as best as you could, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't know until you're in it.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point that you touch on there. Part of the reason that we do this, have people coming into the interview process, is that it's a great way for people that are new to the industry or new to the company to learn an awful lot about the industry very quickly. And learn a lot very fast isn't a recipe for a fun, easy time. It's a recipe for a lot of mental exhaustion, but you do learn a lot. So, Deanna, what were you expecting? Where were you at when you came into it?
Maybe I should say just what I didn't expect, which was that it's a very different kind of interview.
Oh,
So,
yes. Excellent. I'm
because
making a note on that, and we're going to explore that a bit. So, yes, please
um,
talk more about that.
well, when I've done interviews in the past, it's been open-ended questions, and then you just let people answer the questions in the detail that they want, and then, it runs along and you get the gold in that. But that's when you maybe have.
Eventually.
Yeah. I mean, that's when you have basically, a half an hour for three questions. But Best Fleets is really different. And I learned that right away because you have maybe 50 questions in an hour and a half. And when you ask those questions, they can't be open-ended. You really have to be precise in what you ask because you need to get information from the fleets that really helps them tell their stories. So you're reading their responses and you're going and you're asking very precise questions to get more detailed information, and it's very different and it's fast.
That's a good point because one of the things that you learn after you do that sort of open-ended question thing is that people will give you an answer and it will be their answer to that question. But then you do that two or three more times at different companies and you realize they're all giving you the same answer because they don't really have a clear answer. If you ask them an open-ended question, they often will give you an answer that is very generic and, well, we treat drivers like family here and we've got an open door policy. Oh, that's great. We'll write that down. So you win. You got an open door policy, you win. It doesn't tell you anything. So you have to drill down and get a lot more precise with it. But I think that was a really good observation. And it was one of those things that as soon as you said it, I was like, oh yeah, we should probably tell people that in advance, because I'm just so deep in it every year that it hasn't occurred to me that, oh yeah, we do need to do a very different kind of interviewing here. And you need to, in some cases, be ready to pivot in the type of interviewing that you're doing very quickly, depending on how they're answering these questions. So yeah, that's a really good observation. So Trish, you're coming into it for the second time, but also the most deeply immersed in the program throughout the entire year. So you had gone through it when you were fairly new to the job. You went through all of the sort of program elements, doing podcasts and newsletters throughout the year. And you were very clear on how much you were looking forward to doing these interviews again. So
Yes.
when you got in there, how was it the second time?
Oh, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I think it's probably my favorite 7 weeks of the year now, because I love having that time to connect with the fleets and find out what's different and unique at each and every one of them. Every fleet you speak to has something so unique going on, and finding out what that is just, it thrills me. So I loved it.
So did you find that you were more prepared, that it was an easier process going into the second time?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I found last year I was nervous as I started each one until probably about 15 in, and then I went, I think they're as nervous as I am. So this year I realized they're going to be nervous. I don't need to be. And it was just more about connecting right up front and letting them know we're just going to have a chat. They know their companies, so there's no need for them to be nervous. They just need to share the information.
Okay, yeah, very good. Yeah, Rick, how was it for you going into it the second time?
I'm going to ping off of a little bit of what everyone's once said. It's true that first year you experience how nervous they are, and then when I was
Mhm.
reminded of that this year, it clicked over for me. Okay, set them at ease and get them to understand that you're actually there to help them. You're there to fill in some of the blanks.
Mhm.
And so this is where it connects with what Deanna was saying, because your interview style is your interview style. Mark, your interview style is very direct. I want this answer, I want this answer, this answer.
Yeah.
And mine is slightly more wide-ranging. And while that can be helpful, because companies are there, to tell their story, but they don't necessarily know how to tell that story. So if you can
Mhm.
open up your questions a little bit, then you can get some gold that they'll tell you things that they didn't know that they should be writing down and didn't write down. And there's some really, really important stuff in there. But you can get caught out, as I have. My interviews tend to run a little bit long, and I'll realize I'm an hour in and I'm only halfway through the questionnaire. And so now I've got to hustle a little bit. So you gotta, open the throttle a little bit and then just pull back a little.
Mhm. Um, yeah. So one of the things that we've done for several years now as we bring in new interviewers is we have them sit and listen to me do one interview and then sit and listen to Jane do an interview. And Jane and I each have completely different styles in interviewing. And you touched on it, Rick. Mine, you put it politely, as direct. Yes, I'll take that as a compliment. I know my interview style is to get in and out as quick as possible. I've been doing this for so long, and I know that I only have so much in the tank for interviews each year, and every year it gets to be a little bit less. So I'm trying to get as many interviews in as I can before I sort of burn out on doing them. And so I go through there, and man, if I could have an interview done in half an hour, I'm laughing. That's my dream, the half-hour interview. Jane, on the other hand, is having a lovely conversation with them. She still gets all of the information, but she'll be 90 minutes to 2 hours, and she'll be okay with that. My head, it will explode at the concept of that. So yes, you have to, and you have to balance it. Part of it is practicality, because we've got a lot of them that we have to get through. We've got a very limited time to do it. And we're getting better now that we've got more people involved. So you can take a little bit longer, but you still have other work that you have to do. You can't have one interview per day and have that be your entire day. You've got to find a way to get through them. But that is the fire hose that you're talking about, is the amount of things that you have to deal with and things that you have to get comfortable with. So getting them to tell their story in a way that's going to be useful for us later when it gets to scoring, where we get some specifics, that is a little bit challenging. So one of the things that we did differently this year, and I think we actually started partway through the interviews, we changed the order of how we do the interviews, because the questionnaire is in a particular order. It starts with compensation and benefits and ends with work-life balance. But we don't really care that much about the comp and benefit stuff. We collect it for stats, but we don't score very much of it. So what we find is that people sometimes get stuck in that. The industry, and I think this goes to what both Trish and Rick, you were just saying a minute ago, they go into telling their stories, and they are very conditioned to talk about their comp, talk about their benefits, and they will spend that hour just talking about comp. You make the mistake of asking a question about a bonus program, get comfortable. Yeah, you're going to be there for a while.
Yeah, especially if you're talking to a recruiter.
Yes, that's a good part of it. Yes, and you sometimes don't know until you get into the interview who's in that interview with you. Mm-hmm. Yes, they start going through all of the details, and we're sort of writing it down, but we don't score it. We're not scoring bonus programs, so it can really derail the whole interview. So this year, partway through, we changed that, and we left the comp and benefit sections to the end. So we started with, depending on the interviewer, we would start with the HR section. We might start with work-life balance. I saw some people go completely backwards, start with work-life balance and work up to comp and benefits right at the end there. And I saw somebody that sort of mixed it up. So that made a big difference. And for Deanna and Lindsay, you were in it for the first time this year, so you wouldn't really have any comparison. But for Rick and Trish, how did you find that changing order? Did you find that change your flow a fair bit?
Yes and no. It changed the flow of it, but it didn't really make a difference. I found you still covered everything. I tended to move through any company information, comp, benefits pretty quickly anyway, because the meat is beyond that point. So it didn't really make any difference changing it up.
See, okay. It was very helpful for me because of that problem I said earlier with the way I tend to interview and leave it very open-ended. We all come into it really enthusiastic, those first few questions, and then I end up, having to rush near the end where those media sections are. So starting a little bit later on, if I need to hurry things up, near the end, well, if we put those comp and benefits ones at the end, then we're not missing as much. So for me, it was a simple thing that I'm not sure why I didn't see it before, but it ended up being very, very helpful.
Well, I've been doing this for 16 years now, and it only occurred to me when somebody else mentioned it. So you're off the hook on that one. So we've talked a little bit about the actual process of doing the interview, or what happens when you're conducting it. But in advance of that, before you even get to the interview, there's a lot of things that need to happen. And that's a bit of an eye-opener for people as well. The scheduling process, reviewing the questionnaires. So this year, we actually introduced the idea of an irritation score that we were going to keep for all of the participants. So for those of you watching this, yes, you were graded on how irritating you were. Keep that in mind as you prepare for next year. And it serves a couple of purposes. One is that it's a pressure valve for us. There's a lot of things we're doing, and sometimes people just drive you nuts with the dumb things that they do, and you have to have some way that you can say, all right, I'm punishing you for this. We don't end up ever factoring it into the scoring as it happens. You never really need to, because those people always self-select out anyway. But I know there was some things where people were very much leaning on that. And the one that jumps out, well, Lindsay, I think you had a couple of them actually. You had one, the one that sticks out to me because you posted it in our channel was the one who they basically wrote nothing in their questionnaire and they want you to be their secretary.
Yeah, they specifically said that they didn't put a lot in the questionnaire so that we could explore it more during the interview process, which just meant that during the interview I was like frantically taking notes and trying to capture everything. And it was like, it's not really helping because it would be a lot easier and much more enjoyable interview if we were able to just discuss what you had rather than me trying to capture it all for you.
Yeah. Well, and there were some people, and I think, can't remember who got it. I think most of you were involved in, there's a couple who will remain nameless, whose questionnaires is like, they're past winners, and it's like they decided to destroy their questionnaires. Like, how can we do the worst questionnaire possible? How can we fill this with as much marketing as possible and remove all carriage returns, paragraph breaks, anything like that, spaces after sentences? Let's get rid of all of that stuff. And let's just dump a mountain of text in here so much that it overflows the space. And there we go. That'll be it. So one of them in particular, I think was yours, Rick, that was a very problematic interview, to put it nicely.
Yeah, and the process of the interview was just sifting through and
Yeah,
separating the wheat from the chaff, and there was a lot of chaff.
yeah,
And it was strange and I mean frustrating, speaking to the irritation score. And on both those ends, both writing too much and, as Lindsay experienced, writing too little, you are, as the company, you're relying on everything you need to get down to come out during the interview, rather than taking your time in the before and really being selective and precise, which
mhm.
is going to pay way more dividends than the other way.
Well, and that's why I harp on it a little bit in advance when we're doing our preparation webinar for everybody. And I've written stories about it and talked about it. All of these things tell us a lot about how the fleet operates. So you can look at it and say, well, why does it matter if they wrote a lot or they didn't write anything? Who cares? Well, what it tells us is how they approach any task. And you got a really good sense from each of these fleets of how they operate before you even looked at what the specific answer was. Like, Lindsay, you know that that's a company that isn't going to do the work, is not going to put the homework in, is going to try and get somebody else to do it for them. That doesn't really suggest a great workplace culture. And Trish and Rick, I know you both had interviews where you had frustration points where they had a lot of really sloppy data in there, or stuff where they just clearly didn't pay any attention. And Trish, your point about recruiters in there, they just put junior people in there who can't really answer the question. All of those things tell you an awful lot about how the fleet thinks about things. This is them putting their best foot forward, trying to say, yeah, we are among the best. And if this is them at their best, what's it like on a bad day? What's it like for a driver there? Right? That's what I always think about.
And that's
So,
not to mention the ones who don't end up finishing the questionnaire, because we can see how they're progressing, and the ones that hit
mhm,
maybe 36, 39%, and then it stops because they've
yeah.
realized, oh, this is a lot more work. Well, isn't that a planning issue, right? So they don't end
Yeah.
up making it in, but it's certainly signaling something as well.
Yeah. You can go and look at the entire questionnaire in advance. You can print the whole thing out and share it amongst the management team and decide before you get into it if you want to participate. So there's not really any secrets there. So
I like the companies also that had these thorough answers up until like the second last section. And then all of a sudden it was one word answers like, we've run out of time, we've run out of steam. Yes, no,
yeah,
not
we're tired
applicable.
now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So what on the flip side of that, we talked about some of the irritation things, but we also went the other way to really note people that went out of their way or were just particularly enjoyable to deal with. So I don't remember the specifics who was on that, but I know we did have a few. So any of you recall what was it that put you into the really happy space with the irritation score?
I can think of one fleet in particular. Reading the questionnaire was easy. They had subtitles, titles, bullet points. There was no marketing at all in it. It was
Mm.
all very clearly laid out, very relevant information. There weren't any as per last year's or new in 2013. You knew exactly what they were doing this year. It was clear, it was easy to read, it was straightforward. So it made the interview a dream. The people were nice, they were on time, they connected, they didn't reschedule 6 times. Those were the really great ones because it also made scoring easy. You had an easy interview, then you had easy scoring because
Mm-hmm.
you knew exactly what they're doing for their drivers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have anything that jumps out?
I think you just treating your score well and being clear about the information you're putting in. Break it up into sections. Imagine what it's like for us being able to pick apart what's relevant and what's not relevant. Because if you're not doing that, we're going to be in a bad mood. But
Yeah.
those questionnaires where it's super clear and they've bolded what they're doing new this year, and it's actually this year, is such a joy.
Yeah. Well, there's something that I noticed as well, or I'm always kind of thinking about is when we actually get into the interview. Now that all of these things are done on Zoom and they're all on camera, which I've grumbled about that before, and I will continue to grumble about how much I miss the old days of doing it on the phone, where I didn't have to be sitting up straight all the time. But on the other end of that, what does their connection look like? So there's some people where it's a crappy connection, and they've got 5 people around a speakerphone, and they're all at least 10 feet away from it, so that they're shouting and you can barely hear what they're saying. Those things are stressful. Or the other side of it, where everybody's on a separate connection, they brought in a few people and that's it. They haven't brought 20 people into the interview. You are clear on who's there and they know how to speak about it, and they speak very clearly and they've got good connections. Oh, it makes such a big difference. Such a big difference. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about the scoring part of it. So Trish, you mentioned things being easier to score. And the interview is a bit of a fire hose, or the interview process is a bit of a fire hose of information. And you're looking across the entirety of a fleet, but you may only be doing that for 10 companies, 10 or 12 companies. We had enough interviewers this year that I think most people only did about 10 or 12 on their own. But when you get into scoring, it flips, and you're looking at one specific question and you're looking at every single answer to that question. And that's a whole different kind of fire hose. So let's start with sort of, well, what were you expecting and sort of what did it turn out as on the scoring? And so, Deanna, what were you sort of thinking you were going to get from the scoring?
Well, I think one of the big challenges, especially for someone who's new to the process, is that you really want your scoring to be transparent. And that's important because, down the road, if a fleet comes back and says, why did I get this score? Well, I mean, they're not going to be talking to me. They're going to be talking to Trish or you, Mark. And you have to be able to say, well, actually, you got your score because of this, and look at how you compare to others. And it's all the markers are very clear. So I think that's when you're starting and when you're new, I think that's the real challenge. You're looking at what's been done in the past, but there's different things happening this year as well. So putting it all together and making it transparent is key.
Mm-hmm. And also, how does that factor in when you've got so many that you have to compare? Like this year, the participation rate was down a little bit with the tough economy, but I think we still had 60 finalists in the default category, and then another 6 or 7 on the independent contractor side. So that's a lot. You've got 60 answers that you've got to compare, and they're all fairly wordy, and there's a lot of stuff in there. That can be really tough to make sure it is transparent, right?
Yeah, it can be a challenge bringing it all together. That's for sure. There's a lot of thought that goes into it. That's for sure.
And defining how you're going to score. What are the vectors that you're going to score people on? And what is happening? And it may be totally different than it was last year in some cases. Yeah. Lindsay, what was your experience like? What were you expecting when you came into it, and how did you find it?
It's kind of like the same as Deanna in the sense that, you start going through them and what you thought you were scoring against, whether you picked up last year's matrix or you sort of started with something fresh, but you could get through like 3/4 of the way down your list, and all of a sudden somebody throws a wrench in your plans. And you're like, oh man, now I got to go back and kind of reevaluate everyone I've already done because I gave them a 5, say, but now this is a 5. So you kind of have to start all the way from the beginning again and reevaluate. So that was a little tricky. And then I had one question where even I had gone through it and was really struggling with it and ended up on a call with you, Mark, and we just decided at the end of the day not to score the question because basically it was a program that back in the day nobody was doing it, but now it's pretty standard across the industry. So it meant that there was really nobody was doing a whole lot more than anyone else.
So, in a testament to the normal world of best fleets, I don't even remember what that was. So
I
many things.
actually forget which exact question it was too, but
I vaguely remember having that discussion with you, and that's one of the challenges as well, is that you go into these things thinking that you're going to score these different questions, but as you get through it, sometimes you discover that you really can't, that there really isn't anything there. Everybody's kind of doing the same thing. Oh, I think it might have been coaching. It was one of the coaching questions. Oh, no, you did that one, didn't you, Rick? You did coaching.
That's correct. Yeah.
And that was, I think, a good example of one where we ask about coaching programs beyond new entrants. So not just stuff for new hires or not just new hire coaching, but sort of ongoing coaching for drivers. And so when you chop out all of the stuff that is actually just for new hires, and there was some other thing that we chopped out that was actually covered in another question, I think we ended up taking the scoring range down to being quite low. Like it had been maybe a 5 in the past, and it was maybe out of a 2 or something. It might have even just been a yes or no at this point. So sometimes you get through that and all of that happens, right?
And I think the experience of interviewing versus the experience of scoring is the difference between going out for a drive and you're taking a look at the landscapes and what's out there and lifting the hood and looking at the engine. That
Lost him. Hang on, you have to say
experience
that
shift.
again.
Oh, sorry.
Going out for a drive and then you froze.
Oh,
You
sorry.
left us
Yes. So
hanging.
going out for a drive is like the interview process, or you're looking around.
Yeah.
But the scoring process is like lifting the hood and looking at the engine, right? So
Yeah.
the scope of your focus really narrows in, and you're looking at those details. And
Yes.
and if you're not ready for that, you're going to look at your spreadsheet and you look at all these things, and you're like, "Oh, what do I do with this?" So you got to change your focus and really zone in.
Yes. Yeah. I look at it as a horizontal versus vertical kind of approach. You're doing interviewing, you're kind of going horizontally across the country. And when you get to scoring, you're looking vertically at just one column and digging deep into that. So yeah. And Trish, how was the scoring process for you? You got some difficult questions, some different ones. So you didn't get all the easy ones. So we give everybody easier questions the first year they're in it. And then the second year, you get the harder stuff. And so Trish, you had some that were more challenging this time.
Yeah, sure did. It's amazing when you start trying to pull out the answers. And like you say, you're looking at 60 fleets at once and you're trying to note everything that they're doing. So we start out with this tally of columns, and each column gets a different title for what they've got. And you've got 30, 40 columns, and you're going, is this the same as that? No,
Yeah.
they're also doing that. Okay, this is, another column. So it ends up being quite the dive into it. And to loop that back to the questionnaire, if you're reading paragraph after paragraph in marketing jargon and can't find the answers, it makes it really difficult because now you're on the 59th fleet and you've read their answers, you've read the interviewer's notes, and what are you doing? So it's Scoring's really different than interviewing.
And to Lindsay's point, you get 2/3 of the way down, you think you've got it, and it's like, all right, I'm going through and I'm applying these scores, and 2/3 of the way down, they're all getting fives. It's like, huh, okay, this ain't working. So then you have to go back to the drawing board.
Yes. And sometimes you have answers where you think you're going in one direction, but it just totally changes. Or you've got fleets answering it in completely different ways. So it's really hard. You've suddenly, instead of apples to apples, you're going apples, oranges, watermelons. Oh, wow.
Or in some cases, it's the apple chicken wrench. And you gotta
So
try and make
true.
sense of it. Yeah.
So true.
Okay, what do I do with that? You know, which are my categories?
Exactly.
And there are times, and it happened to me this year is again, it always happens where you get to the end and you think, okay, I've got it. You know, I'm going to sort of leave it. And then we always sort of figure it out externally, and we'll put together our matrix and our spreadsheet, all of the ways that we're going to score it, and then you leave it. And sometimes it'd be something just sort of sticking in your head, and it's like, doesn't feel right,
Yes.
you know. And I think there was I had a few conversations with each of you around those. It's like, yeah, there's something that's just not feeling right here, and we revisit it together, and we drill down, and we go through all of this, and we sometimes will end up realizing that there are a bunch of things that we're counting separately that are really the same thing, or there are things that we're giving points for that really everybody's doing, but only a few mention it. So you got to chop those things out, because like, well, yeah, you all have that, even though only a few of you say it. So we got to chop those out, and you end up scoring it in a completely different way sometimes. So,
and there's also the shock factor sometimes. As you're reading through some of these answers, you hit some and go, what?
yeah.
And sometimes it's a good one, like, wow, that's unique. I love that program. And occasionally you're hit with you're doing what? Oh. And you think about how that impacts those drivers. And you look at it a whole different way when you start thinking best fleets to drive for, not to manage, not overall. It's where do those drivers really get looked after? And that's something I kept in the back of my head. And there were times when I'd come back on some answers and go, how does that impact the drivers? And we talked about that several times, Mark, when you'd say, is that better for drivers, or is this one better for drivers? And that's a really, really important thought, that that's what we're looking at. Where are the drivers looked after?
Yeah, for sure. So the other challenge here is, I think everybody goes through scoring, and I think both Deanna and Lindsay, you said this to me. Yeah, I'm really eager to get to interviewing now that I've done scoring. I'm way better positioned to do my interviewing. We have this chicken and egg thing every year. So on the one hand, yeah, you're well prepared to do interviews on those questions that you scored. But on the other hand, how well do you think you'd be able to score those things if you hadn't done the interviews? So Deanna, I know you've mentioned that you're eager to get back to interviewing now that you've sort of really got a nice method for scoring. Do you think you would have been able to do that scoring if you hadn't done the interviews first?
Absolutely not. I think that, I mean, the interviews, like, those are key in terms of it's like a boot camp, really. And you really need to have that experience to do the scoring, or else it's really out of context. And it's helpful. And I do think that, absolutely think that, you know, scoring helps you refine your interview process as well. And I think that, you know, it might be shorter next year. My interviews might be shorter next year.
You can always hope, right? Yeah.
And you've also got to be careful not to steal happiness from your future self in the interview. If you're like, if you don't put as many details in your notes, and then when scoring comes, you're like, oh, I should have put more details in there.
It happens to me every year. There's a question where I'm scoring, and I will be going through it, and I'll be like, oh, this is such an obvious question. Why didn't this person ask? Like, this answer makes no sense. Why didn't they follow up on it? And I look at it and see to see who did the interview, and it was me. Like, what the hell was I thinking? Why didn't I ask? And even this year where I didn't do that many interviews, but I did review nearly every questionnaire that everybody else was prepping for their interviews. There's a lot of those where I'm like, why didn't I catch this? I should have flagged this. It's so obviously not the answer. And none of us caught it to ask them about. So it is a process that gets better every year, and it never is perfect. Every year you end up cursing yourself for things that you missed, but ultimately, the fleets have to tell their story. We can only help them so much, and it's up to them to figure out who they are and what they're all about and share that story publicly. So that's what I tell myself every time I fail on these things. So. Okay, so coming towards the end of the episode, let's shift a little bit and talk about sort of post-scoring and what happens after that. And I'm going to go to Trish because everybody focuses on sort of the scoring of the individual questions, but once we've got those individual questions scored, there's still a lot left to do. And this year you got to be a part of that, to put them all into the giant spreadsheet and figure it out. So what can you tell us about that process? What was that experience like?
Oh, it was exciting. In a nutshell, it was very exciting. There was a lot more to it than I thought there would be, but it makes sense given the importance of it and given the vast amount of information that we collect. It's not surprising, but at the same time, it was kind of shocking that there was so many steps, and add this and put this in here and this goes there. And the whole time you're thinking, oh, I can't wait to see the results. But you have to go through the steps before you can get to the end. But once we had sorted it, it was just, it was that awareness of, okay. The really nice thing was, as you went through and we figured out who were the top fleets for the year, who made it onto the list, going, yeah, they had great answers. Yeah, I enjoyed talking to them. Yeah, they did this. And you could think back to the scoring, and very often the highest scores were going right to those folks. So it makes sense at the end.
Mm-hmm. So for everybody else, when you saw the results, you saw the top 20, the Hall of Fame, the fleets to watch, did it surprise you? Were there things that you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that? Anything? Or was it totally within what you were expecting?
I had one fleet of mine that I interviewed quite early in the process that always kind of stuck in my head, like, I think this is going to be a fleet to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended up getting fleet to watch. So I was kind of happy about that. And I can't even tell you at this point, because it was so early on, what it was about them that made me think that they had a chance at that. But so I was happy to see that they had gotten to that category.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
I get inordinately excited about the fleets to watch because there are, in the top 20 in the Hall of Fame, like there are some usual suspects, and you can tell in their answers and their programs and the driver satisfaction, like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And then there are some new ones that come in, you're like, oh yeah, that they did very, very well. But then there are those ones you're like, those answers are, maybe they'll make it in, maybe they won't. But I feel like there's something very, very special there. And then when they hit the fleet to watch, I'm like, they absolutely deserve that because maybe they're not all the way there yet, but man, they're on the right trajectory, and it's gratifying to see that they get recognized for that step.
Hmm. Yeah, there's always one that surprises me, and this year it was absolutely Crawford who made it onto the top 20. And when I saw the list and saw their final numbers after we went through that whole process of putting all the scores together and compiling, I'm like, Crawford, who are they? Like, I don't even remember them from the scoring. But then I went through and looked at it. It's like, oh yeah, I can see. I look at their answers and how they scored, looked at their performance on safety and turnover and all that stuff. And like, yep, they earned their way in there. They're clearly there. But there's so many of them. And the C name company is going to be in the middle. That's probably a third of the way through the interview or the scoring list. So at that point, you're not remembering any names. You know the name of the first two on the list and the last two on the list when you're scoring it, but all the rest are just a big cloud. And so they're right in the middle of that. But when you look at the details, it's like, okay, I can see why they got that score. They definitely earned their way into that. I always find that interesting, surprising, and it's cool to see that those people are coming through. That they're working through it.
There's
And
also, oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I was going to say there's also those fleets where you went, they're doing some amazing things and they just didn't quite make it. And they're not a fleet to watch, or they are a fleet to watch, and you just think, just stay with it. I know you'll get there.
Yeah.
You know, those fleets
Yeah.
where they were just not quite, but you know they've got great stuff going on.
Yeah, I had a couple of those where I was going through it and thinking, oh, these guys have really got some stuff going on. I really
Yes.
like them. And then we're going through in the scoring. I'm like, oh, they're not doing as well as they thought they would do. Damn, I can't give them the points for that.
True.
And so, it goes both ways, but it is
Yes.
always an interesting experience. So just coming to the end, let's talk about the big crazy day. And so, Rick, you were watching it from the outside. Deanna, you were exempted from it. You got a break. But Lindsay and Trish, you were there for the crazy that is the big announcement. So, Lindsay, tell us a little bit about your experience with that, and what was it like on the big announcement day?
I had it kind of easy because I was in charge of the email. So I could just set that one up and it went out at 9 a.m. when I told it to. But just being part of the call first thing in the morning this year for the first time was interesting to see all the different, we have a great team. So everyone kind of knew their roles and what they were going to do and executed it all in a timely fashion. And of course, it was not without its hiccups, but everyone worked together to make sure that it went off as smooth as possible.
Yes, thank you, Facebook, for screwing us on that, as you do every year. Yes. Yeah, and Trish, you were in it now for the second time, and yeah, my perception is it went very smoothly. And there's a mountain of things that we have to prepare for that, but it seems like it went pretty smoothly. Is that how you felt about it too?
Yeah, this year felt much smoother than last year. The hardest part, I think, is as you're trying to tag all the companies, you're thinking, everybody's waiting to know this. I've got to get it out there. They're all waiting.
Yeah, well, that is the challenge, is that it's happening. They know it's coming at 9 a.m. Eastern. They're all ready. And if you've got a delay in posting something, it's a headache for them. Yeah,
Yes.
and they're unhappy about it. But Rick, watching it from the outside, how did it come off? What did the show look like from the front of the stage?
Oh, fantastic. It's great to see social media explode. Like once the list comes out, and those pings just keep coming uh, as each fleet is like, we did it, we did it, we did it, and uh, it's just kind of this little celebration that you can watch unfold in real time.
Yeah, yeah, okay, that is cool. It has gotten a lot smoother in the last year, that's for sure. We used to have a lot of headaches. It would be, in the old days, it would be kind of the night before or the day before. Jane and I are like, oh, we should put together a movie on this, and we should recognize these people, and we're scrambling to put together these announcement movies, and realizing that we don't know when the official press release is actually going to go out. So this year, like, all of that was much smoother. So it was a much nicer experience overall, even though I had to be on a Zoom call at 5:45 a.m. Pacific time. But I'm getting used to that now. So I think that's going to bring us to the end. So before we wrap up, any final thoughts on the process, and tips for future interviewers, scorers, anybody that's going to come into it next year? What advice would you give to them?
Enjoy. Enjoy it. It's a wonderful process. The program is fantastic. Anybody who knows me knows I love this program. Enjoy the process. It's exciting, it's busy, but you'll look back at it and you'll be so much better for having gone through it, whether you're a fleet or an interviewer or scorer. You learn so much and there's so many takeaways. Just enjoy it as it comes.
And it's
Anybody
okay to
have?
be
just have to have-
nervous. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm gonna
Totally
be
okay
As
to
long
be
as you-
nervous.
I'm gonna be
As
more
long as you have a
specific.
fraction of Trish's enthusiasm, you'll be good.
Yeah. Okay, Deanna.
I was gonna say, be detailed but concise. Bullet
Okay.
points are your friend.
They're our friend too.
Yes, yes. Detailed and concise bullet points. Yes. Nobody has the dissenting opinion from Trish that be scared, be very scared. All right. Well, in that case, then let's wrap it up. Thanks everybody for attending, and thank you all for listening to this episode of the podcast.